Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Hugh Freeze and this Auburn football program, I project to be one of the more aggressive teams across the country in the transfer portal over the next couple of weeks. And it's almost that time. And I think what's unique about Auburn going into this transfer portal cycle is it doesn't need to be 25 players coming in. The last two off seasons, Brian Harsin left this Auburn team in a dumpster fire from a talent standpoint. When Hugh Freeze got there were so many roster holes among this team that they just had to go and get so many different players. I think going into this transfer portal window, if you will, it can be a lot more targeted. You look at this Auburn team, we've kind of said this throughout 2024, it is significantly better than what their record says. And I think most notably, the best players emerging on this Auburn team will probably be back in 2025. It's a lot of the young cats stepping up on both sides of the football. And so you're going into this transfer portal and saying, we don't need 25 players. I don't know what the exact number it's going to be, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a class. But I think it's going to be really targeted in terms of getting difference makers specifically at the quarterback position, but kind of filling in this Auburn roster. That's what excites me the most. It can be a lot more targeted. It can be the quality of player that they can bring in is going to be higher because the quantity doesn't need to be all that big. Fired up to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, I think first, just wishing y'all a happy Thanksgiving. Thankful for you guys, the Auburn fans. Y'all have shown a ton of support as we talk the transfer portal, as we talk the recruiting trail. So hope y'all are having a phenomenal Thanksgiving. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, for the Auburn fans, this is not the first time or last time that we're going to talk about targets and talk about position groups. So I would love to hear from y'all in the comment section as well. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into the big storyline, and that is the quarterback position. I think this was kind of the plan all along, right? You kind of settled late to bring in Peyton Thorne before the 2023 year. You decided to settle and just ride with Peyton Thorne going into 2024. This, I think, like where you want to start is how would we be talking about Auburn, and where would Auburn be if they brought in a guy like Cam Ward? It'd be a different conversation. I don't know if Auburn's winning the SEC, but I think they would be contending at the top of the conference. And so if you're Hugh Freeze, you're looking at the quarterback transfer portal and saying, we have to get a difference maker. And I think they purposely waited a year so they can have a lot of resources and a lot of funds to go get their guy. Now, who's that guy going to be? I got two players I want to talk about. Now, a guy like Miller Moss has been getting a lot of buzz. I'm a big fan of Miller Moss. I don't know if he's that premier difference maker at the quarterback spot. I think he's a really damn solid quarterback that's going to transfer somewhere and have a lot of success and win a lot of football games. But I don't know if he's a guy that elevates your team significantly. I think Noah Fafita could be that guy. Now, you go back to Noah Fafita in 2023. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the country, won 10 games with an Arizona team that just historically is not a very good program. Now, why did the production dip in 2024? I think one, that team's not very good. Like outside of Noah Fafita and T-Mac, who get all the national media buzz, like you dive into that team, it is not a very good team with a brand new coaching staff. I think that's kind of the result of a down year from Noah Fafita. You put him in this Auburn offense with all the weapons that they have on the outside, and that's worth noting. This is an attractive offense to come play for. Many of y'all know I'm a Michigan fan, and Michigan wants to go get a transfer portal quarterback after last year. Look, ain't no quarterback want to come play for Michigan. This is an Auburn offense when you're throwing to Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons, Perry Thompson. This is a very attractive offense for quarterbacks. So not only do I think Auburn has, the funds, so to speak, but I also think that they probably have, that attractive offense for quarterbacks to come and play. And so Noah Fafita, probably the first one on the board. Now, I think the second guy that you want to talk about is Kevin Jennings. Am I positive Kevin Jennings goes to the transfer portal? No, I'm not positive. But if he does, I think he'd be my first call. And what Kevin Jennings has done in this SMU offense has been incredible. He's one of those guys that is clearly elevating everybody around him. And it starts with the arm talent, but it is closely second followed by what this kid does as an athlete. Doesn't take sacks. He's just so difficult for defenses to prep around because of what he can do outside of the pocket. This kid in this Auburn offense, I think, would be one very fun to watch. I think more importantly, this would be a very, very good offense. So Noah Fafita, Kevin Jennings, those are the two guys that I would look at. And there'll be some other names that pop in that we probably, that we probably don't get. I got Surrey talking to me on my laptop here. We'll probably get more quarterback names as names start to enter. Those are two names that I would be looking at if I'm an Auburn fan. Now, I think the next position group you want to go talk about, I personally think you look at the wide receiver and say, I think you're feeling pretty good. Maybe you want to add one veteran, kind of like you did with Keandre Lambert-Smith, and that obviously worked out in a massive way for Auburn. Maybe you want to add one veteran because at the end of the day, a lot of these pass catches that you're going to have, Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons, Perry Thompson, they're going to be second-year guys, relatively still young. Maybe you add just one, high upside veteran wide receiver who's a proven commodity. That's not a position that I am getting too distracted with, if you will, for Auburn. I think the next position that's probably what I would say glaring is the offensive line, just because you're losing a lot of bodies. Now, I don't have a ton of offensive line names right now because there's just not a ton in the portal and it's really hard to project. I'll tell you what kind of offensive lineman I would like to see them go out and get. And it's the proven guys from a lot of times the group of 5 level or lower P4. I think Dylan Wade is the perfect example. You see a lot of offensive linemen who just haven't really played a ton, but were highly sought after out of high school, transfer and just not really work out. What you've seen a strong track record of is guys coming up from the group of 5 level, those guys that have started, 3 seasons in the Mountain West. They're in Conference USA and have played really good. And then they go up to the Power 4 level and play really good football. I think Dylan Wade's one of the best examples, but there's a laundry list of guys from last year's transfer portal cycle that even transferred in from Ivy League schools that were pretty damn good this year. And so that's the kind of offensive lineman that I would address. And again, you got some young guys that you like, but you probably want to get some more veterans because you're going to lose a lot of seniors. And so you probably want to just go grab a few guys that are proven commodities that can come in and make sure this offensive line has a high floor going into the 2025 season. Now, the one other position that I think Auburn should be a player in for, in a certain, kind of like the quarterback spot, like a certain kind of player is a difference maker on the inside of the defensive line. Auburn did a really good job addressing the depth, bringing in guys like Isaiah Rakes and Philip Bleedy. I don't think you look at any of those guys on the inside and say they're difference makers, they're game wreckers. That's one of those when you look at high caliber college football teams, think of the Georgia defenses in 2021 and 2022. Think about Oregon with a guy like Derek Harmon and what he's meant to that Oregon defense this year. That's the kind of body I want. I feel decent about the depth, and I feel really good about the difference makers at the edge position. You talk about guys like Falk, Kieran Crawford potentially coming back, Amaris Williams, Jamonta Waller, and you have a lot of youngsters that are going to be true freshmen on the inside of the defensive line, and chances are some of them are going to be ready to go. So from a depth standpoint, I think you feel pretty good. What Auburn might lack that, a guy like Isaiah Rakes isn't, is that true game wrecker. Now you look at a guy like Bear Alexander, there are some stuff off the field that you got to make sure are squared away. And I could completely understand an Auburn fan saying, hey, Jay, we ain't messing around with Bear Alexander. And I get that. And if Auburn does the background stuff and they say not a good fit, that is what it is. This is the kind of defensive lineman I'd want. For as inconsistent at times Bear Alexander was last year in 2023 for USC as a true sophomore, the flashes were there. And like this kid, if he puts it all together and some of the off the field stuff come together, I think this could be all SEC caliber defensive lineman. And so that's the kind of defensive lineman. Another name I look at, Jaheim Otis from Alabama, obviously a name Auburn fans are familiar with. Number 1 player in the transfer portal right now. Very similar to Bear Alexander. There are some off the field stuff you have to square away, but you've seen some special stuff from Jaheim Otis. And if you can get him and bring him on campus and it all comes together, he brings a value to the inside of the defensive line that guys like Isaiah Rakes just can't really bring. And so Jaheim Otis is another name that I certainly would be looking for. But in general, what I'm looking for is that one guy that if you are an opposing offense, you got to scheme around. You look at, I think Derek Harmon is the best example. We were kind of banging the table for Oregon to say just one name there that can really wreck some games. Like if you're an offensive coordinator going up against Oregon, you got to figure out how you're going to deal with Derek Harmon. I don't know if there's a guy on the inside of the defensive line that defensive coordinators are going into and saying, we got to figure out a way to scheme around Philip Bleedy. or we got to figure out a way to scheme around Isaiah Rakes. So that's the kind of interior defensive lineman I'm looking for. And then maybe you feel really good about the secondary. I mean, like the way Jay Crawford or Caleb Harris is playing, like I'll look at the secondary next year and say, I feel pretty damn good, especially if you end up flipping a guy like Naheem Offord. You got some really good defensive backs coming in. I think you feel good about the secondary. Maybe another body in the linebacker room, like losing guys like Asante and Austin Keys, guys that have played a lot. I'm high in DeMarcus. This is not an anti-DeMarcus Riddick take. It's more just, hey, we want maybe a couple more bodies. Troy Bowles, a guy that I think could play, has been developing in Georgia's system for the last 2 years, but probably not going to get the opportunity just because Georgia has a uniquely talented and crowded linebacker room. I'd take a look at him because that's one of those guys that you see some Georgia guys that they just don't work out, and maybe they just were ranked too high and maybe just ain't that good of football players. I'm not ready to say that about Troy Bowles. Troy Bowles is a guy that just because you ain't playing in front of Raylan Wilson or CJ Allen or Smell Munden doesn't mean you can't play. And so I look at Troy and say that would be a guy that would be really interesting to add to that off-ball linebacker room. Him and DeMarcus Riddick, if you get the best out of Troy, him and DeMarcus Riddick over the next couple of years, really, really intriguing. Again, kind of closing this conversation down, we'll get a little bit more of a clear picture when we see some names start coming into the portal after these games on Saturday. I think Auburn's in a good spot because I don't think they need to bring in 30 names like they've had the last 2 years. From a young talent pipeline, you're in a good spot, and it allows Hugh Freeze to use the transfer portal in a more effective way. And that is, let's identify just a couple of different position groups that we want to get better. And instead of having to go get 30 of them, we just need to get maybe 10, maybe 12 transfer portal additions. But because that number's cut in half, the quality of player is going to be better. The quantity might not be the same, but the quality is going to be better. And that's how I think teams should be using the transfer portal. It shouldn't be a way to build a roster. It should be a way to supplement it. I think Hugh Freeze has had to use it to build a roster the last couple of years because Brian Harsin just flat out was a disaster. I think now you're kind of in that mode where we can just supplement, and I think that matters. We'll close it out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. Hopefully y'all have a phenomenal Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.